I am, I am, I am in transition, so I am not working.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that wonderful?
I'm just going to ask you, how's that working out?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's
That
wonderful.
in-between break is needed?
Yes.
That's
This is my first break other than, normally you have the split vacations.
yes.
Right. So you can take a 2-week here or 1 week here. So
Yes.
this is better than taking a vacation.
Okay. Understandable.
Yeah. So after working so many years,
Yes.
it's like it's a good break.
They say a needed one.
Yes, it's a needed break. Came at the right time. So everybody, let me see. Tony is on, and Keishala is on. I'm looking for Keishala. I don't see Keishala. Chris Barr. Donna. Kristen and Monique. Yeah. So only one person is missing. Okay, so you have your book?
Yes, I do.
Okay, all right, so let's get started. If you have any questions as I go through, you can let me know. I always just stop me.
Yes, ma'am.
So let me see. Donna, you're in the mortgage corp, so you know a little bit about mortgages.
Donna Leah, yes.
Donna Leah. Yeah, you always say the whole long syllable. Okay, Donna Leah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
So you know a lot about mortgages?
I'm not an expert.
Well, why would you say that?
Because I'm just new in this department. I came out of the insurance department. And,
okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's see. What about Chris?
Hi. Also not an expert. So but I have
I don't know. I know students like to say this. I don't know why. You're new to the department too?
No, so familiar. So I'm doing I guess back office risk, but familiar with credit as a product, but not in the detail as I wish that I would know for mortgages themselves. So
okay.
Hopefully
All
after
right.
this course, I will be an expert.
Okay, good. Okay, let me see who else. Let's go down to Monique. RBC.
Hi, this is Monique. I've been working in the mortgage department at RBC Finco for the past 13 years. My role is just named Mortgage Support Associate.
Now we have an expert, Monique. She could give us good examples. Who else is on there? Yes, you can give us good examples.
Yes, I'll do my best to do that.
Okay, and then we have Tony. She's at the credit union in Grand Bahama.
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you're in the mortgage section?
We just started mortgages a couple of months ago, and I have dabbled in maybe 1 or 2 of them.
Okay.
And, yeah, I'm feeling my way through, but I'm sort of loving it.
Okay, yeah. That's good.
Yeah, it's very interesting to know all of this information that you didn't know.
Yeah.
And to know your rights and your wrongs.
Yes, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it is.
And then my next question I always ask students is, do you own property or do you have your own personal mortgage?
No, I don't.
Okay, anyone in the group?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, this is Keishla. Yes, I have my own mortgage.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so their experiences will be different from mine, who've never had one.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, Keishla, what do you do at BOB? You do mortgages also and credit?
Hi, yes, I am a relationship officer at BOB. Right now, I really focus on consumer lending. I did a few mortgages, but we don't do mortgages in the branch anymore. So I'm here now to get more knowledge in mortgages.
Okay. So it's done where at head office? Or not at
We
all?
have a mortgage department now. It's at the
Ah,
Carmichael Road branch upstairs.
oh, down in the back there. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's get started. So this first chapter is about just a general for you to get a general knowledge of what Bahamian land law is all about. And before you could even talk about mortgages or talk about um, buying a piece of property or owning a piece of property, you have to understand what land law is all about. So we start the chapter off by talking about property, because some people normally will say, I have property. And the word property means ownership. Like if I say, this is my property, and I'm looking at my car, we're talking about ownership. If you say, this is my property, you could again be referring to pieces of jewelry or boat or car. That's what property means, ownership. So the law of property is the law of ownership, but it's also connected to rights. So when you have a piece of land, you don't own that land. You have rights over that land. So property can also mean that which is owned. But remember that in property, you're talking about the law of rights to land. So if property means ownership, then what does ownership mean? So ownership means the right of a person to enjoy the property to the extent of the law. Or it means a right to assert that something belongs to you. And it is a right that you could assert against anyone else who comes and say, I own that. So ownership, by definition, has three types of rights. The first one is the right of use. So when you own something, you have exclusive use. And the owner may not use that thing himself, but he could prevent others from using it. So this is like if you have a vacant piece of land, you own that land. And by owning that land, it means you have a right to that land. You don't have to build a house on that land, but you could prevent others from doing so because you have rights to that land. The second definition of ownership in terms of having rights is you have the rights to profit. And profit means that right you have in that land, you can rent it, or you can lease it. You can do different things with the land because you have the rights to that land. And the third thing is when you own it, you own property, you can use it up. And using it up means to alienate it, which means that you can diminish it or you could destroy it. So someone who has a piece of land, they can go on that land because they have rights to that land and they could dig 100 holes in the land if that's what they want to do. Or they could take a piece of that land and they could light it a fire dig it up, because they have that right to use it up. Also, when you own land and you say you can alienate it because you have rights to that land, you can transfer your ownership. And you can transfer your ownership by either selling the land, giving it away as a gift, or any other legal arrangements. So that's what ownership means. It's a right to enjoy a property to the extent of the law. Now, when you own something, you know you can lose it. And in land law, when you lose that right, that ownership. So when you lose property, it means that you lose physical control of the property and any right to exclude any person from controlling it. Any questions? Because I know it's a lot of students start to get muddled. Any questions?
Not so far.
None so far. So everybody understand?
Yes,
Sounds
ma'am.
so. Yeah, sounds so. Okay. So property means ownership. And ownership is the right of a person to enjoy that property. So whenever you talk about property, you're talking about ownership and you're talking about right to land. So under property, there are other rights other than the three rights that we just spoke about: the right of using, the right of profiting from it, and the right of using it up. You can also have property rights that include easements and profits. So an easement is what you call like a right over one piece of the land and attaches for the benefit of another piece of land. So let me see. So say someone has a piece of land, and on that land, you see one of those, is it a BTC tower? Or BPL is like a tower with all those little prongs going around, is actually sitting in someone's yard. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right, okay. So that is an easement. And what it means is that the utility company has an easement, and that allows them access to that electrical pole on that person's property. So another sort of easement is a right to go on another person's land and diminish it by taking something away. Like some persons like who have farms, they will actually have an easement where their property is the property that has the water. And so someone else, the other person, the property, adjoining property, has to come on their land in order to get water from their side of it, in order for their products to grow. And that's an easement. Another type of property right is what you call a restrictive covenant. And a covenant is a promise, an actual clause in the deed is a promise. And what it is one landowner to another, and you have to continue to enforce it. So within the actual conveyance, there is a clause that restricts the owners, no matter who the owner is, because it runs with the land. A restrictive covenant could be in the conveyance, it will say this land is not to be used to sell liquor. And so every time that property changes hands, someone else purchases it, that restrictive covenant stays in that in that conveyance. Now, in land law, once you say you own a piece of land, that ownership is entitled. And remember now, for mortgages, title means that you must have a good title. And that title is in the conveyance, in the actual deed. So property law concentrates on the fact of possession. So if you are dispossessed of your land or your goods, the person don't have to prove that they are the true owner, because it's not about ownership per se. It is about proving who has the right to possession, or who has an earlier right to possession. An earlier right means a better right to possession. And remember now, when you talk about land law, possession means exclusive use and control of the property. And possession also means that there is no right or title to the property. So possession can be evidence of ownership. So let's say if you're in a house, you're in possession, and you have control, physical control over that. So you're the tenant, and then there is a landlord. And by you being in physical possession, you have control. So when you're dealing with land, the purchaser always insists on what they call a formal proof of ownership, which means that the vendor has to prove that he has good title to that property. And he has to do that by a certificate of title. His title demonstrates the strength of his ownership to that piece of property. So it tells you that that person, the vendor, has the right in possession of the land. And that means that then the purchaser has a better understanding as to whether or not he can actually acquire an interest in that land. Because he has to be sure that no one else has a better title to that piece of land. So those of you who work in mortgages, when we do the second chapter on real estate, you'll see why they go through that whole process of having the root title actually carried out, and sometimes why it takes so long, because of the time frame that they're working with. So whenever you talk about ownership, which means property, and ownership means the right of a person to enjoy property to the extent of the law. And knowing that true ownership in land law is referring to the title to that land, you have to be able to step back and look at things that are capable of ownership. So you know that land can be owned, but there are other things in law that can be owned. And one of those categories is what you call a chattel. So those who work in credit would know, like when someone gets a car loan, these are physical things. It could be your clothes, your tools, books, your animals. But there are also things in law that are also classified as being something that can be owned, but they are intangibles. And that'll be like your debts, your patents, your copyright, shares. Now, the thing you have to look at is, how do you classify property? So property can be real property and it can be personal property. Real property, you know, talks about an interest in land. And we'll come back to that later. The other property is personal property. And personal property can be tangible and intangible. So someone who has a leasehold interest. Everybody knows what a leasehold interest means?
No.
Okay, so a leasehold interest is where you have a person has an interest in land, and that interest is a freehold interest. And then they enter into a legal arrangement to lease that property to someone else. The person who is in that lease arrangement has a leasehold interest. That falls under a personal property because it's not real.
Ms. Archer, can you give me an example of that? I'm still a little lost.
What, a leasehold interest in land?
Yes.
Leasehold is where, let me see who would have a lease. Okay, take a warehouse. So you purchase a piece of property and you have both legal and equitable interest in that land. But now you've decided that you want to use that land for profit. So for profit means for rent, or you can lease it. The difference with rent is you have exclusive possession and you have physical control. You agree? When you rent a building.
Yes.
But when you lease a building, you actually lease it for a period of time. In that contract, it'll say the landlord lease you this property for 10 years or 20 years. That
Yes.
lease gives you a leasehold interest. And
Okay.
that leasehold, right, that leasehold interest means if your lease is for 10 years, you can now, let's say you took that property and you wanted to store you going to sell bicycles for Christmas. And you decided that you're going to use that building for that purpose. So you take out a lease for 10 years. After the first year, you see this business is not going to work, but you have a 10-year lease. When you look at the clauses in your lease, there are repercussions,
Yeah.
penalties, if you
Yeah.
decide that you cannot keep it for 10 years. So you're now going to go and find yourself another tenant. And you could take your 10-year lease and you could lease that building to someone else. But it cannot exceed the terms of your lease.
Of your lease. Understandable. Okay.
So if your lease was for 10 and you've already used up a whole year, then you could only lease it for 9 years.
For 9 years. Okay.
Yes.
Understandable.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So you have what we call chattels personal. I remember we spoke about personal already. Cars and boats and all those other little small things that people have. So under chattel personal, you could subdivide that even further in what we call choice in action or choice in possession. A choice in action is property which doesn't physically exist, such as like goodwill. When someone is purchasing a piece of a business, they do not purchase it just for the value that's on the balance sheet. They normally purchase it for the value plus the goodwill, which means the reputation that goes with the business. How long the business has been in existence, its location, its jurisdiction, all of that. It's branding. All of that comes in the goodwill. Another way you could look at chattel personal is in possession. And this is, again, is the personal property, but what can be physically protected, such as your books and your clothes, computers. So whenever a bank uses a piece of property as security, they would normally, for chattel personal, they would take either a legal or an equitable charge. And they would use as security life insurance, shares, guarantees, or they can actually do a debenture. So that's under property, that's personal. So now let's look at land. Land may include real property, and the real property is the building, the structures on the property, and the rights over that land. I remember rights can be easements, it could be mining rights, it could be rights of way. You know what rights of way mean?
No, ma'am.
Okay, rights of way means this. Let me see if I could give you an idea. Okay, you know, in you could have a block of a block, let's say a block of land. I'm talking about within 2 streets, and all of those houses go behind each other. One house is behind the other house, and you're going to the house, the one before the last. The rights of way means that the person in the front has to allow you to be able to get to your house. You have to pass through their land in order to get there. That's a right of way.
Okay.
Okay? So always remember that real property is always distinguished from personal property. So land law, like I said, is talking about rights over land. Nobody owns land. You own a right in that land. So when someone comes to the bank or the credit union to apply for a mortgage, in order to do that, they must have what we call a interest in that land. And that interest has to be a legal interest to obtain a mortgage. Because that's when the bank takes that interest in land as security. And by doing that, the bank then restricts you from your freehold rights of ownership. So the land is not affected when you execute a mortgage. It's actually the rights over the land. So whenever you think about land, land has two types of right over it: a legal right and an equitable right. And a legal right could either be a legal estate or a legal interest. And a legal estate is the ownership, and it gives that owner an entitlement to possess or occupy the land. And that's what we call freehold ownership. So a legal estate can be a freehold estate, or it can be a leasehold estate. So when you have a freehold estate, it is said that you have that property and what we call fee simple absolute in possession. And fee simple means that the estate and the land can endure indefinitely and pass either by sale or by gift by you. Or it could pass by will. Or it could pass under the rules of intestacy to another person. You know what rules of intestacy means?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. And I say ask questions, you could stop me anytime. So if you have a freehold estate over land, it means that you have that land in fee simple absolute in possession, which means you own that outright. You don't owe anybody on that land. You're actually holding two interests in this land. You own both legal and equitable. That legal estate, that fee simple absolute in possession, means that one, fee simple, that estate and land is yours, and you could pass that because you own it without any encumbrances on that land. And you could sell it, you could give it away as a gift, you can include it in your will and pass it to whomever you wish. Or if you die without a will, that's the rules of intestacy, that property can still pass to another person. Do you know the rules of intestacy in the Bahamas?
No.
No, ma'am.
Oh, Lord. Oh, listen to that no sound like.
The rules
right,
of
let me see.
intestacy.
Yes. So when you die, right, you can die. Before you die, you can write a will. You can change your will as many times as you want. Anything that's written in a will. So say if your father wrote a will and he says he's leaving you the piece of property on Prince Charles. He's leaving someone else a house on whatever street. A lot of people are always under the idea that I've read the will, I've seen it, now I own it. I can do whatever I want with that property. A will speaks from death. Nothing happens until that person dies. When that person dies, the executor that is listed in that will takes over.
Want to be a millionaire? Crack the code today. One code, two companies. Log on to islandlove.com or ultragames.com for more information.
Okay, somebody radio on. Okay, so in that will, you would appoint your executor. So once that person dies, that executor then has that responsibility to ensure that the deceased wishes are carried out. Now, the executor can act as soon as the person dies. So the executor can go and make sure that all of the assets are actually listed there, they're aware of anything else. And then they would go and make an application to the court for probate. Now, if a person dies and they don't have a will, then it is said that they died intestate. The same word you see the intestacy, but it's called intestate. And when you die intestate, that is without a will, the law of the Bahamas determines how your assets are to be distributed. Did you know that?
I've heard something about that.
Yes.
Yes.
You heard about it, eh? Okay,
Yeah,
so
I actually didn't believe it was true.
it is true. So
Okay.
if you die without a will and you leave a husband or a wife and you have no children, the surviving husband or wife takes all. If you die and you leave a wife or husband and one child, it is split half to the wife, half to the child. If you leave children and a wife or husband, the wife or husband takes a half and the other half is split between the children. If you die without a will and you have no husband or wife left, just children, then it's shared equally between them. If there's only one child, no wife, no husband, that one child takes all. Now, if there is no husband or wife, no children, then it's distributed to your grandchildren. If you only have one grandchild, it goes to that one grandchild. If you have no husband or wife, no children, no grandchildren, it goes to your mother and your father in equal shares if they survive you. If only one of them survives you, that mother or father takes all. Now, if you don't have no husband, no wife, no children, no grandchildren, no mother, no father, then it goes to your brothers and sisters. If you don't have no brothers and sisters, it will go to your nieces and nephews. And if you don't have no nieces and nephews and no brothers and sisters, it'll go to your grandparents. And if you don't have any grandparents, then we'll go to your uncle and your aunts. And if you don't have any uncle and aunts, it'll go to their children, your uncle and aunt's children, your cousins. So that's why it's important that you write a will. No questions?
No
No, ma'am.
question.
Okay. So you see how important it is to write a will, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So absolute means that it is unconditional, and in possession means that the freeholder is either in actual possession or has the right to receive rents, as in the case of a freeholder who has leased the property. A leasehold estate, the tenant derives the estate from a superior tenant, which I explained to you already with a leasehold. The granting of the lease, the person who grants it is the landlord or the lessor, and the person who receives the lease is the tenant or the lessee. So even though you have a leasehold arrangement, the freeholder still has his freehold interest during the continuance of the lease. So at the end of the lease, it reverts to him if necessary. So the same way a freehold estate is called fee simple absolute in possession, a leasehold is referred to as terms of years absolute. And which I explained to you already, it has a fixed term. And remember, it's actually a contractual agreement. So unless there is a provision in the agreement whereby the leasehold is actually terminated, such as a breach, then it continues for the duration of the lease. And remember, I said when you have a lease, you can actually use that as security, but it can't exceed the period for which of the contract. So interest in land can be legal or equitable interest. A legal interest is a right over land which is given to a non-owner, but is still valid against everyone. And it gives that non-owner a right which is less than actual possession. So an example of that is a permanent right-of-way over a neighbor's land. It gives the non-owner the right to cross over that neighbor's land. And then, like I said earlier, an example of that is an easement, which is like a privilege to go onto another person's land. Another legal interest could be a charge by way of a legal mortgage, or it could be a rent charge, or a right-of-way. An equitable interest are legal rights, and they are valid against anyone who has notice of such rights. And remember, notice can be actual notice, or it can be constructive notice. So if someone is selling a piece of property and the